Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. How to make somebody understand by listening to Audiotaped Testimonies from 1946. I will try to give answers by talking about a project, Listening and Historical Understanding, approaching early testimonies of the Holocaust. That's the working title. In a nutshell, it is a web-based platform that will make available original voices and their translations for simultaneous listening and reading. This is just the basic. Our main focus will be on detailed and multidisciplinary comments on various aspects of these rare oral testimonies. The platform is still at its conceptual stage, so I'm really looking forward for your comments and critique. Soon after the liberation, in April 1945, images of innocent victims reached the US via print media, newsreels, and exhibitions. In these pictures taken by contracted photographers, the horrible repercussions of Nazi terror and crimes are visually frozen in time. However, most of these photographs represented an outside perspective. To quote Susan Sontag, they invited to look at images of suffering. The pictures of atrocities that had reached the US had also and certainly impressed David P. Boder, a Jew from Lithuania and a trained psychologist, as you know. He realized very early on that these pictures lacked an essential feature of communication, namely, as he put it, the avenue of hearing. The end of April 1945, Boder sketched his mission for his interview project. I quote, "For psychological as well as for historical reasons, it appears at utmost importance that the impressions still alive in the memory of displaced persons be recorded directly, not only on their own language, but in their own voices." End quote. By asking straightforward questions, Boder wanted to have exact recordings of their tales, as he put it, personal stories. Yesterday we have learned from Carolina Panz how Boder's interviews can bring research and archives into being, and stimulating them, and how such a successful research can be done. And you know, Alan Rosen has wrote a wonderful study, The Wonder of Their Voices, which will be central and a good starting point for our own research. Our educational platform will profit much from those studies already available, which are not so much actually, and their own conduct of research. We put efforts in a dense contextualization. The platform is designed in particular for a German-speaking public. I will explain later on why. For sure, it is by no means easy to really understand these interviews. One might easily be submerged into painful stories, lose the distance required for clear historical analysis and debate. But little is won for historical analysis and awareness by mere identification with and empathy with the victims. Self-unsettlement will only occur, and I speak here as a German, willful self-unsettlement will only occur when concern for the stories of the victims does not turn into identification or worse, appropriation through instrumentalization. It is therefore also required to address questions on how society and perpetrators are linked, to look at the connects between sociological conditions, attitudes, emotion, and motives. Quite a number of the interviews of Boder came forth with offers of their own accord. For instance, Otto Feuer. Within days after being liberated, he had become an active agent. He was among those witnesses who were ready to become a witness, to give help for the US Army War Crime Branch. And after some days after the liberation, he also was among those prisoners of Buchenwald who could greet the American troops and thank them that they liberated the camps. That was only a 1-minute talk he could give. Boder met him in August 1946 again in Paris, while he was still waiting for his passage to the US. And I invite you to listen to him just for 2 minutes.
That I was from September 40 to June 41. When I was brought to Buchenwald, and Buchenwald I was from June 41 up to April 11, 45, and we were liberated by the American troops. Do you want? I can't tell you generally about my experience in the camp. I could tell you something.
Well, you pick what you think is significant, but of your personal experience.
Well, I should like to
Suppose you are a lawyer.
Yeah.
Suppose you are accusing the Nazis before the American people. Now what do you have to say?
What I have to say against them,
Concrete what they have done to you.
I don't want to talk what they have done to me. I want to talk what they have done to all of us, and for instance, what they have done to men. I don't even want to talk men in general, to German men, to men, yes. I want to tell you how they succeeded in changing the brains of normal men. I should like to give you some examples. Only one example. It was one of the most powerful experiences I had in Dachau. We were working
Later on, Feuer begins to talk about the gray zones of the struggle for survival in the camp. It becomes clear that by focusing on which conclusions to draw with regard to humanity in general, he managed to avoid telling more about his own conduct in the camp, and Boder did not probe deeper either. There are many things, on the other hand, that Boder wanted to understand in detail, but above all, he did not want to take anything for granted. Boder, an expert of perceptual and linguistics psychology, fought against the consequences of the strategies and adopted by the perpetrators who tried to normalize their crimes, a strategy that even would permeate the speech of some of the survivors. Boder asked them repeatedly to choose their words carefully and joined them in their struggle to give testimony to what they have gone through. Voices of the Holocaust, the homepage you will very well know, is of course very basic for us, and we developed already cooperation with them. By an accumulation of testimonies, such an accumulation of testimonies does not yet make history. History in the sense of a methodological analysis and interpretation of documents and artifacts. No doubt additions of testimonies are valuable as they provide a working basis. But speaking with regard to the German situation, they begin to speak only once those whose grandparents and great-grandparents were among the perpetrators and sympathizers are willing to engage with these interviews directly, by way of informed interpretation, public inquiry and debate. In order to enable such a deliberate self-upsetting, willentliche Selbstverunsicherung, as it Volker Knigge puts, the humanities need to build bridges to the non-academic world. Just some outlines of our online platform. We take only 20 out of the 120 interviews from Boder. The written text will feature high-quality literary renderings into German, similar to Voices of the Holocaust. Transcriptions in the original language will be provided for native speakers as well. Still, the main focus shall keep on listening, since listening allows for an appreciation for the non-semantic forms of vocal and emotional expression that are crucial to convey the ambience of the interview settings. The absence of video imagery at the faces of the witnesses, which is rather unusual today, may be another advantage. To speak with Lawrence Oken, German philosopher and contemporary of Goethe, I quote, the eye leads us into the world, the ear leads the world into us, end quote. These editorial decisions epitomize the main ambition to tap into the historical, political, ethical, and aesthetical potential of these interviews by the way of offering tools for interpretation and debate. We would like to enable and encourage a curious audience from 16 years up maybe, but not younger, to probe and absorb these biographical testimonies at their own pace. An interdisciplinary setting serves the purpose of consciously challenging the perspectives of historians by contrasting them with interpretations, comments and debates in fields such as sociology, literary theory, cultural studies, philosophy, linguistics, didactics. Some leitmotif questions. What role did search for meaning and biographical losses play for the structure of the narratives? Which aesthetic forms did survivors develop for their stories? How did grief, hate, despair, gratitude, and hope shape the survivors' approach to tell their experience? By which overt and covered moral agendas were the narratives as well as the questions of Boder structured? How came historical knowledge into being about the camps, the ghettos, what we can learn about Jewish and non-Jewish reactions to persecution, about women, adolescents, the elderly as well? What role did language skills and did play for the struggle for survival? The interviews invite further elaboration. How was truth in these narratives negotiated in the language and the emotions they entailed? Accepting Boder's invitation to speak in their own voice can also be understood as an individual way of negotiating past experiences and navigating future perspectives. What kind of truth, in the plural, are the victims ready to force upon themselves and on somebody else, which is Boder in that case, but Boder has his message for the US. What might be acceptable to the interlocutors, and what might be met with resistance? Who is speaking and who is speaking to whom in which language? At the end of her interview, Bella Żnilek, a Jewish woman from Poland is asked whether she would like to say something to her own people in America. Please listen to how the 22-year-old responded.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything that you want to tell young people in America from you? I'm sure. What do you think you want to tell them about all the displaced people and the routine?
Well, I just have never died, and I'm happy that I'm ever got up to do questions that I have like this.
Well, I'll start a few remarks in Polish. Go ahead.
Chciałabym jeszcze powiedzieć, moi przyjaciele, że każdy z nauczycielów powinien mocno nieraz wiedzieć za te krzywdy, jakie nam wyrodzili, nam i naszym rodzinom. Za to, że złamali nasze serca, że złamali nasze domy, że chyba nigdy nie odwróci się to wszystko.
This was a kind of a postscript that I wanted to have because it's exceedingly important to have the feelings of these young people. We noticed here that she spoke in German and English, in Polish, and when it came to express her feelings, she preferred to express it in Polish. This polyglotism or multilinguistics, if we want to call it that way, represents a psychological and ethic problem at the same time.
Boder considered the emotions of the young women to be a reason for her switching from English to Polish. But Ellen Rose convincingly demonstrates that it was less her use or emotional setup that prompted her to speak in Polish, but rather the group she wanted to address. Thus, her decision was less informed by evidence than rather by audience. Her choice of language reflects the tension between consolidation and retribution. In speaking Polish, she addressed only Polish-speaking Jews in the US, while excluding those whom she had addressed so authoritatively before. In this postscript, Boder had talked about an ethnic problem. Later, in his transcript in the US, back in the late 40s, he would change this to an ethical problem. Significant transformations like these in Holocaust testimonies are to be interpreted cautiously in an interdisciplinary dialogue, I would argue for, which language is apt to address which audience at which point in time. This is another reason why it will be worthwhile to set this fragile wonder of their voices in context with later videos, and other scholars and filmmakers would do from the 1970s on with some of the very same people Boder did interview in 1946. I come to the end. Given their circumstances, Boder's interviews are themselves, of course, interpretations, not least because he interviewed those he interviewed felt obliged to adhere to the particular truth. Boder himself was after good stories, as he put it, and helpful messages for America. Another reason not to take everything at face value. This is also why we think that our platform should facilitate a careful interpretation of these testimonies. It should also allow for the recognition of tacit allusions and linking testimonies with each other wherever possible, although with the testimonies of some perpetrators and of those complicit with the crimes. Originally, Boder had planned to interview with perpetrators as well. I tried to present this extraordinary collection of interviews as a rich and rewarding field of research. Appreciation of its polyphonic and ambiguous character always also intended to serve as evidence for the crime committed. This richness should not make us forget the loss of individual life and personal history that each of these interviews represent. In 1946, 3 years before Boder had decided the title of his first and last edition should be "I Did Not Interview the Dead," he has taken the picture of himself showing him in front of a board referring to the furnaces of Dachau. He would use this image at the very first publication about these interviews. Thank you very much.